Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to do a review on the Garmin Xero C1 Pro chronograph. What is a chronograph? Well, it measures the velocity of your projectile, bullet, whatever you want to call it. And that could be from a firearm, it could be from like a bow, it could be an arrow, it could even be a air gun pellet or something fired from a slingshot. This thing can measure all of the above. Why would you want to measure those? Well, if you want to hit targets at long distances, you have to know the velocity of the projectile, how fast it is traveling, for you to be able to predict precisely, how much elevation you need to dial in to make that hit consistently. You also need to know, if you're using ammunition, for example, how consistent that ammunition is in terms of velocity from one shot to another. If you had one shot coming out at 900 meters a second and one shot coming out at 800 meters a second, the faster projectile would be hitting high on target, the slower projectile would be hitting low on target, and ultimately you would never ever get consistent hits on target at any great range. So for long range shooters, this is absolutely vital. And for any shooter really, it's good to know the quality of the ammunition you're using. So even if you're shooting things at very close ranges, then you would want to know, from shot to shot, are you quite consistent in your velocities? That's going to tell you a lot about the performance of the ammunition itself. It's also going to come into play if you have limits. So you might be doing airsoft, for example. You have to find out the velocity of the system. You're going to equate that with the weight of the BB that you're firing out of that, and you're going to be able to ascertain from those two measurements whether you're meeting the energy requirements or the max energy that you're allowed to use on that game. And the same goes for some rifle ranges. They might have a muzzle energy limit, and this would allow you to compute that based on your muzzle velocity at the muzzle and the weight of your projectile as well. So it has a plethora of vital uses. Traditionally, when these things first came out, they were basically using light, and I'll throw up a picture of one of the sort of early models of these things. They had two light sensors. They were spaced a certain amount apart, and it was a bit like a speed camera. It would break the light sensor one side, the projectile going through it, then it would travel a fixed distance to the next sensor, and the system would be able to work out the time of travel between those two light sensors and therefore the velocity of the projectile. The problem with those is that they were quite big and cumbersome. They were pretty inaccurate, especially if you were using them outside and the light outside was changing. It was like a cloudy day. Sometimes they didn't give readings, and you had to shoot through these two sensors. Often people would end up shooting these sensors themselves. You would have to try and position them downrange. That meant that you had to kind of get onto the actual range itself in front of the firing point. Sometimes that's not always possible on ranges. Once the range is hot and everyone's using it, you just can't move forward onto the firing point anymore. So they were very, very difficult to use. Then we had devices like the magneto speed. That would be a bayonet type attachment that clamped onto the front of the barrel. They are actually pretty damn good, but they're a bit of a fiddle. You have to attach them to the front of the barrel. And for some of the shooting community, especially long range rifle shooters, they don't really want to clamp things onto their barrel because that can start to affect point of impact. And if they're measuring velocity, they often want to measure the accuracy at the same time, and they would feel that sort of having this system sat on the end of the barrel would affect that. And as I said, it was kind of a pain that you had to take it on and off. With some muzzle brakes, etc., it was very difficult to get it to work. Especially in the bigger calibers, you would have to buy a special attachment to get around the really big muzzle brakes. And basically it was a pain to set up. Then after that came the lab radar, which I'll throw a picture up of all these if I can find one. The lab radar was quite a sizable unit, about yay big, and that would be positioned next to your rifle. It would point down range, you would shoot. It was sending out a radar pulse, and that functioned like a mini Doppler radar basically, and it would give you a reading of velocity on that projectile. The problem with that thing, I tried one multiple times because I was quite excited when they first came out. they were very, very inconsistent. They were really picky. You know, if you got them set up just right, pointing at just the right angle, you could kind of get them to work most of the time. But then if you put a suppressor on the gun or you were running a different muzzle brake, they would stop working and you'd have to fiddle around again and make all kinds of alterations to sensitivity and slightly change the angle and change it again, and you would be burning through round after round trying to get these things working. I've actually tried to use a few on military demos that we were doing, and it was pretty embarrassing, you know, because you're supposed to be there looking very professional. You're getting this lab radar set up and it looks very impressive, and then you start shooting and have to spend like 15 minutes trying to actually get it to bring accurate results. And by that time, the customer had kind of lost a bit of faith in what you were doing. It made you look unprofessional. I was incredibly excited when this Garmin came out. I think it almost looked too good to be true. I was actually involved in some of the testing of the prototype device. I was out with some of my defence industry buddies and we were lucky enough to get our hands on one of these before they were released, and we did some testing for the guys at Garmin. I was incredibly impressed. You know, the form factor, the size of this thing was unbelievable compared to the old lab radar, and I was fully expecting it to be as fussy as the lab radar. So I thought, we're going to have a system here that is a lot better in terms of form factor, weight and size, so I can carry it around easy, but I bet it's got the similar problems. Well, actually it blew me away. This is probably one of the easiest chronographs I've ever used. Its consistency of it reading shot to shot is unbelievable. Like it's probably my favourite piece of shooting kit in the last 15 years that's been released. You know, there's not much else I can think of that's come out on the market that has worked as well as this and has been as useful as this. So if we open up the box, we can see there we have a little tripod attachment, and we've got the little Garmin unit itself. Take that out, you can see the form factor there. We have a standard tripod attachment in the bottom. Now it does come with this little tripod which screws in. It's nice that they provided that. The only downside to that little tripod is it's basically fixed. You know, it's not able to tilt the head at all. It's fixed height. So that's going to be very, very dependent on how you shoot, you know, what platform you're shooting off, as to whether you can actually sit that next to you. It might be worth investing in something along these lines, which is similar, but you obviously have a lot more room. You can extend it up and down. It's still very lightweight. This is from Ulanzi. It's cheap. I think it was about 20 or 30 quid. I'll stick a link up for one. And it's got a ball head, so you can tilt that around, firm it back up again. And, you know, a lot easier to use. Obviously a little bit bigger than what comes with the Garmin, but it does give you a lot more options. So let's take a look at this little Garmin unit. I'll just take the tripod off there. We can see it has some very simple buttons on the top. That's what I like about this unit, is simplicity. We've got an OK button, a back stroke power button, and then we've got two up and down buttons there. So if we press the power button, we can see the unit turns on, and very, very simple. You can just move it up and down with these buttons on the right hand side, and then obviously select OK. So if we were going to go new session, OK, it's going to ask us what type of system we're using: rifle, pistol, bow, other, etc. So we select rifle. It asked us what kind of velocity band we're expecting, so you should know pretty much what sort of velocities you're expecting out of the system you're firing. So if it's rifle, we're probably in the upper velocity range there. Now you can, if you wish, enter the weight of your projectile. It'll ask you the grain weight of the projectile. That's if you want to measure the energy. So that would be useful, like I said, for your airsoft guys and people that have energy limits on ranges, because that's going to tell you your energy at the muzzle, which is vital in those cases. We're not bothered about doing that. And then it gives you a very useful little image there of how you would set it up in conjunction with the rifle. And this is the part I really like about this device, and I'll throw some video up now. You can see me shooting with this thing next to me. It is not at all sensitive in terms of, you know, where it's positioned. I put it pretty much where the diagram says to put it, but if you make little errors in that, you know, it's pointing slightly one way or pointing slightly the other, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. You know, you still get great readings from it. Once you've got it positioned, you simply press there and it's ready to start taking shots. Then we can go back, take it back to the original. If we press OK there, you can actually find some options that will give you things like display brightness, and you know, you can change the units, all kinds of different options there. It's a very simplistic list. So you've got units, meters per second, feet per second, backlight timeout 30 seconds, which is default, but you can change that. Display color black, and you can change that to display color white. You can change your data field to show slightly different things in the display, and then you can have a shot list and session summary. Now the shot list and session summary are obviously useful because that's going to give you an overview of all your velocities, and it's going to summarize things like your SD. It's going to give you your average, your max, your min, all very useful information if you're a serious shooter. If you're not going into your shooting, you can look back and have a look at your history. So if we click on that, select OK, you can see there we've got some historical dates where I've actually done strings of shots and recorded them, and I can select any of those and take a look at what I had done. Now I could have reviewed this little device probably a few months ago now, but I wanted to wait because a lot of people would use this, think it's great, you know, and they have no idea about the longevity of it. I hate to recommend stuff unless I know it's really robust, especially stuff that's going to be on ranges, is going to get knocked around, is possibly going to be mounted on a rifle and shaken about, because that's one of the options on here. I've seen some companies manufacturing rails, so you can actually mount this next to your gun, and that would be held on a Picatinny rail off to the side, so you've got clear observation on it at all times when shooting the gun. That wouldn't be my preference, by the way. I don't think it's a great idea to imbalance the rifle and make it heavier with extra kit on it. Might look cool, but not the best of ideas. Also, you want to be able to take this and stick it in your pocket and just stick it to the side of the gun, whatever you're doing. And on top of that, with any electronic device, you know, the less that you can shake it around, the better. I don't care how hardcore they've manufactured the thing. I personally wouldn't think it's wise to just shake the hell out of it through recoil energy. So I would always use a little tripod with this, or position it on something, you know, rather than actually mounting it to the rifle itself. But if that's what you want to do, you can do that. Now I have used this in multiple different calibers. I've got some footage you've probably already seen of me shooting a 260 rem. I've shot it with a 308, I've shot it with a 338 lap mag, and most importantly we've put quite a lot of rounds of 50 cal, and this was positioned pretty much next to a very big HS50 muzzle brake, the Steyr HS50. I might have a still picture of that shoot. It was a defense shoot, so I haven't got a lot of video or anything on that, but this was set up right next to it, and if you look closely on the back, you can probably see a little bit of scarring where it was throwing up so much dust and debris every time that we shot from the 50 that it was knocking this over sometimes, and it was actually, you know, ended up putting some scars on the back side of this. It was getting results, readings every single time we shot, you know, no problems with the 50 cal at all. Even when we were suppressing the 50 cal, we had no problems with it at all. And even when it was getting blasted over, covered in muck and dust, and it was a 48-degree day in the middle of the desert, I should add. We had no problem with this at all. That wasn't in England, by the way. So I think I've put it through its paces. We've also shot this in Wales, you know, in the middle of some pretty horrid weather where it's been driving rain. This thing's got soaking wet. So we've had high temperatures in the desert. We've had freezing cold days in Wales where it's got absolutely soaked through. It's been left wet and, you know, packed away in a range box for 1 or 2 days while we're out doing all this stuff, and then dried off when we've got it back home, and it's really, really resistant to all that. It does also come with its own USB, because one of the other nifty little things is it's charged up with USB. Now you can actually pair this with a application on your phone called Shot View from Garmin, and it gives plenty of information back to the phone, so it might be easier on a larger screen to then review that information. Very, very easy. The pairing is super easy on this. You simply download the app on here, select add device, you then go into the options on here. There's one called connectivity. Select that, select, you know, pair phone. I think it sends a number to the phone. You just have to confirm that's the correct number. Press add, and within about 1 minute it sent all the information through to the phone and they're paired. And that way, every time you turn that app on, you can drag the information back off of this thing here and you can review it on a handy phone screen. So we've got connectivity, we've got reliability. What about consistency? You know, how does this factor in terms of looking at it compared to magneto speed, or compared to the old light sensor models, or compared to, you know, some of the gold standard stuff? So I've actually run this side by side with Ola's, which are in testing terms the gold standard of chronographs, giving very, very precise velocity readings. This thing was bang on the money with the Ola's. You know, there was virtually no difference in readings at all, unless you're breaking the feet per second down into even smaller increments. You might find some deviation, but other than that, for the average person who just wants a feet per second reading, there's really, really no difference at all between this and the Ola's. Same for the magneto. Like I said before, the magneto speed is a great thing. It's just a little bit fiddly to attach to the end of the barrel, but this was bang on the money with the magneto as well. I've tested the magneto against Ola's and that is pretty much exactly the same. So all three are pretty much exactly the same, with one of those being an industry gold standard. Considering this is much, much smaller than the Ola system, you can transport it with ease. It can literally fit in your top pocket and just pull it out, stick it next to the rifle whenever you shoot. This has got to be the winner, hands down. Once it's charged up, I've had several days use out of this. You can actually see on the top there, it's got a little battery symbol, so you can keep an eye on when it's running down. You could charge it up every night, whatever. Even if you're stuck out on the ranges or operational, most people have a power bank available to them. You know, even if you look at the guys in Ukraine at the moment, they're running power banks and they have USB capability to charge things like this up. So very, very handy little package. And for operational shooters, you know, this is something that your velocity is going to be affected by your environment. So very hot days are going to make you run higher velocities, very cold days, lower velocities. That's something that traditionally shooters have not been able operationally to kind of ascertain properly. They've had to make some guesstimations there and say on a hot day they think that they're going to add X amount of meters per second to their muzzle velocity. With this, even operationally, if you were a sniper team, you could actually stick this next to the rifle. First shot you make of the day, you can actually see exactly what velocity you're getting, and you can true all your data to represent that velocity in your ballistic app. That is not something you were probably able to do before this came out, because everything else was too big, too clunky, or the magneto, which, as we've mentioned, you know, is a fiddle. Sniper teams aren't going to be strapping that on the end of their guns every time they're operational. But for this thing, yes, they could hold it on the rifle like we mentioned with the pick rail, or they could have it set up next to the rifle with the greatest of ease. It's not going to be any sort of great weight to them. I mean, this is light as hell. So really it's absolutely ideal. Do I recommend it? 100%. If you're someone who needs accurate velocities for firearms, this will do bows, catapults, all those types of things. If for whatever reason you need to measure the velocity of something flying through the air, I 100% recommend you get this. And unbelievably, we even tried it for shotguns. You know, I was wondering, could this get velocity readings out of a shotgun? Because there were some people who asked, you know, does the projectile need to be made of metal? Would it pick up the back of a shotgun wad? You know, is there any difference between it picking up various different materials? The fact that a shotgun disperses many pellets, would that have an effect on it? And actually, even though it was slightly inconsistent, so I was able to get readings on probably 4 out of every 5 shots when I was running skeet loads in a shotgun. But unbelievably, it was able to get a velocity out of that. And for those in the industry that have tried, it is very, very hard to get readings of velocity off a shotgun without some specialist equipment because of the nature of the projectile. So the fact that we were able to get readings off this at all was absolutely phenomenal. So even for guys that want to test their shotgun cartridges, they might be an Olympic trap shooter, for example, and they want to know, are my shotgun cartridges pretty consistent from one to another? They can run one of these. Yeah, like I said, they might miss the occasional shot with it, but it's certainly good enough to run, say, 20 rounds through and then have a look at your overall. You might be left with, say, 18 rounds of useful information, and this would be able to provide that. So very impressive indeed. A whole different range of things covered, you know, whichever sport you're partaking in that involves something flying through the air, this has you pretty much covered. Now you might think after all this that this very ingenious little device with its connectivity, its form factor, lightweight, you know, very robust, that's got to cost ridiculous amounts of money. You're probably looking at a couple of grand for Olas in a laboratory doing ballistics work, so you think, wow, this must be super expensive. It's probably beyond the reach of most of the general public. I was amazed at the price point on this. It was actually £600. I think it's around about the same in dollars over in the States. A really, really good price point. About the same as the Lab Radars were, but in a much better package. One thing to note on Lab Radar, they have just brought out something of a very similar form factor to this. Looks almost identical, maybe a tiny bit bigger. I think theirs has a magnesium frame around it instead of this, which is like a hard polymer frame. So that their marketing for theirs is that they think theirs is a little bit more robust. Having spoken to people about these, I kind of found it funny that that Lab Radar got beaten to the punch, because it turns out, I understand that they actually had this concept in mind before Garmin did. Garmin saw what they were doing and kind of had the same idea, but beat them to the punch and got this out quicker. So Lab Radar must have been sick about that. I do think the Garmin looks better. You know, it's slightly smaller, more compact. It looks like a really cool little device. The Lab Radar, you know, it's got its orangey blacky colouring and all, you know, it looks a bit flashy. That's not personally something I like the look at. I never like the look of the old one, its bright orange shape. The operational guys are going to hate that thing. No one operationally wants to have bright orange kit, so I don't really know why Lab Radar do that. It looks awful, but they do. So there we go. And apparently the Lab Radar unit is also very consistent in its readings, and it's around about the same price, if not a little bit more than this. I'm incredibly happy with this Garmin. Like I said, it's probably the best piece of kit I bought for shooting in many, many years. And you might ask, well, is there going to be any problems with the future? You know, is there going to be problems with software and stuff like that as the phone things update? Well, interestingly enough, this will actually be connected to the phone once you've linked the two together, and it will send updates to you. So you can see it there asking software update. And if we just select OK, then we can see it starts updating itself. Again, everything with this, what I really like about it is everything is so easy. You know, I've bought into so many gizmos before, electronic devices, that you just know you're buying into a whole world of trouble. You're going to be spending hours on forums, you know, fault finding and problem solving, and finding that there's inconsistencies, that it won't link up with this phone but it would with this other model. All these things are a real pain in the arse. This thing, it's just so smooth. You know, they've done a really great job of making a very easy to use, smooth, functional unit. I cannot recommend that enough. It is a joy to have a unit from a company that has done all the bug fixing and background work, so that what you get is just an infinitely usable, customer friendly piece of kit, and not something that you're having to work out the bugs on yourself and then send error reports back to the company, kind of doing their R&D work for them. That I absolutely hate, especially on kit like this, which could end up, you know, being used in some pretty serious ways. You really want it to just do exactly what it says it's going to do. This will not give you a BC. So for those of you that want a ballistic coefficient and you think, oh wow, it's a radar, it isn't going to give you a BC. That's because, unlike a very large Doppler unit, this is only sending out quite a small amount of energy, and it's not reading the projectile far enough into its flight. You could, in theory, get a ballistic coefficient by positioning one of these at the muzzle, one at the target end, say near to the transonic range, if you were prepared to risk a unit in case you missed and hit the unit itself. And from those two readings, you could compute a rough ballistic coefficient. It might not be the most accurate thing on the planet, but there really is no viable way to compute that otherwise, other than buying into the OLA system, which is again quite an expensive package in itself. Availability, I actually ended up importing this into the UK. There was an issue, you know, these came out in America and Australia, a few other countries. Because the UK had some very strange regulations around power output for devices like this, they were actually unable to sell in the UK for the first few months. So we had to be the sort of last man in the line, if you like, and wait for these things. And they sent a reduced power version into the UK to be able to fit within those regulations. I didn't want the reduced power version, and I didn't want to wait. I simply bought one overseas and just brought it back with me. So that would be an option. You know, there's no reason. They're not controlled by any licensing or anything like that. You can bring them back into the country. They just cannot be sold in this country by any businesses. But I've heard from people that have used the lower powered version. They haven't had any issues whatsoever. Really, it was just my obsessive compulsive brain that decided that I wasn't having the lower power version. I can give no reason as to why you wouldn't want that one. I don't think it has any great performance lack or anything like that. You're not going to see any reduced capability from it. So I'll chuck a link up for those of you in the UK that want to order one of these. I'll see if I can find an Amazon link or a link direct to the website. For those in the US, I'll chuck a link up as well, and for the rest of the world. If you are going to buy one, guys, try and buy it off my links, because we do make a few pence off of those, and every penny helps the channel carry on doing the recording, doing the videos, and putting out content for you. I seriously recommend this. This is probably the biggest recommendation I've ever given on the channel of any piece of kit I've ever used. I cannot tell you how pleased I am with this piece of kit. If I have any problems with it in the future, you know, reliability wise, and like I say, I've really put it through its paces, but if we do have any problems, I'll make an updated video. If I don't make that updated video and you can still see it in any of the shooting videos I put out there, you know that it's still working absolutely fine. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.